The arrest of Morrison and Lady Catherine sent shockwaves throughout the palace as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. Inspector Collins had recovered thousands of photographs documenting sensitive royal correspondence, security protocols, and diplomatic communications that spanned several years of systematic espionage. The evidence suggested that this was only one cell of a much larger international network targeting European royal families and government institutions. Marcus found himself at the center of the crisis as one of the few senior guards who had not been compromised by the conspiracy. His decades of faithful service and his impending retirement made him an ideal witness for the investigation, but also placed him in the difficult position of testifying against colleagues he had worked with for years. The personal betrayal felt almost as devastating as the security breach itself. The Queen was briefed immediately about the arrests and the scope of the stolen materials. Her response demonstrated the steady composure that had defined her reign, as she focused on practical concerns about damage control and preventing future security breaches rather than expressing anger about the personal violation of her private correspondence. Her first priority was ensuring that the state dinner continued normally to avoid creating an international incident. Lady Catherine's breakdown in custody revealed details about recruitment methods used by foreign intelligence services to target palace employees. The operation had begun with seemingly innocent approaches from researchers claiming to be working on historical projects about the royal family. These initial contacts had gradually escalated to offers of substantial payment for access to documents and information that the researchers claimed would help preserve royal history for future generations. Morrison's interrogation provided more disturbing intelligence about the sophistication of the espionage network. He revealed that similar operations were currently active at royal residences in several other countries, and that the stolen British intelligence was being shared with hostile governments seeking to influence international diplomatic relationships. The network had been operating for over 5 years and had successfully penetrated security services across Europe. The financial investigation uncovered a complex money laundering system that used legitimate businesses, charitable organizations, and academic institutions to disguise payments to recruited agents. Morrison and Lady Catherine had received their compensation through consulting fees, research grants, and donations that appeared completely legal on the surface but were actually payments for espionage activities. Collins discovered that the theft of crown jewels information was intended to support a much more ambitious operation plan for the following month. The conspirators had been gathering detailed intelligence about security procedures and storage locations in preparation for an actual theft that would have been one of the most audacious crimes in British history. The jewelry itself was less valuable than the symbolic damage that such a theft would cause to the monarchy's prestige. Marcus learned that several other palace employees had been approached by the recruitment network, but had reported the contacts to security authorities. Their warnings had initiated the investigation that ultimately led to the discovery of the conspiracy, though the full scope had only become clear during the evening's dramatic arrests. The loyalty of these employees had prevented an even more serious security catastrophe. The international implications of the case became clear as intelligence services from friendly nations shared information about similar operations they had detected. The network had been targeting not only royal families, but also senior government officials, military commanders, and business leaders who had access to sensitive information. The British arrests were part of a coordinated international response to dismantle the entire organization. Lady Catherine's cooperation led to the recovery of stolen materials that had already been transferred to external contacts. Police raids in 3 countries recovered documents, photographs, and recordings that provided evidence of espionage activities spanning nearly a decade. Her decision to cooperate fully with investigators would significantly reduce her eventual sentence, but could not undo the damage her betrayal had already caused. Morrison's military training and security expertise had made him an ideal candidate for recruitment by hostile intelligence services. His access to classified information, combined with his financial vulnerabilities, had created the perfect opportunity for foreign handlers who specialized in identifying and exploiting such weaknesses. His case would become a textbook example of how personal problems could be weaponized against national security. The state dinner concluded successfully despite the crisis unfolding in other parts of the palace. The French president was quietly briefed about the security situation and expressed admiration for the professionalism with which it had been handled. The diplomatic relationship between the two countries was actually strengthened by the incident, as it demonstrated the effectiveness of British security services and the Queen's unshakable composure under pressure. Marcus was asked to provide detailed statements about his observations of Morrison and Lady Catherine over the previous months. His testimony would be crucial for understanding how the conspiracy had operated and for identifying any other employees who might have been compromised. The process was emotionally difficult because it required him to analyze interactions with people he had trusted and respected. The Queen personally thanked Marcus for his service and his role in protecting the palace during the crisis. Her private words of appreciation meant more to him than any official recognition could have provided, as they acknowledged not only his professional competence, but also his unwavering loyalty during the most challenging night of his career. Security protocols throughout the royal residences were immediately revised to prevent similar breaches in the future. New screening procedures would be implemented for all employees with access to sensitive areas, and regular security reviews would ensure that potential vulnerabilities were identified before they could be exploited by hostile forces. The psychological impact of the betrayal extended throughout the palace staff, as employees struggled to understand how trusted colleagues could have compromised their sacred duty to protect the royal family. Counseling services were provided to help staff members process their feelings about the incident and rebuild their confidence in the institution's security measures. Collins received commendation for her investigation and her handling of the arrests, but she also faced criticism from some quarters for allowing the conspiracy to operate for as long as it had before being detected. The balance between maintaining palace operations and conducting covert investigations had been extremely difficult to achieve, and some felt that more aggressive action should have been taken earlier. The media response to the arrests would be carefully managed to minimize damage to the monarchy's reputation while ensuring that the public understood the seriousness of the security threat. The story would be presented as a triumph of British intelligence services rather than a failure of palace security, emphasizing the successful arrest of the conspirators and the recovery of stolen materials. Marcus realized that his retirement was being delayed indefinitely as authorities needed his expertise to help rebuild the security systems that had been compromised. His final day of service would now extend into weeks or months of additional duty. But he accepted the responsibility willingly, as his contribution to restoring the integrity of the institution he had served faithfully for more than 2 decades. The international criminal network that had been exposed through the palace arrests was much larger and more sophisticated than anyone had initially suspected. The investigation would continue for years as authorities worked to identify and apprehend other members of the organization, recover additional stolen materials, and prevent future espionage operations against democratic institutions around the world. Inspector Collins held her breath as she watched Morrison and Lady Catherine work with practiced efficiency in the Queen's private study. The sophisticated cameras they were using could photograph dozens of documents in minutes, and their systematic approach suggested they had been planning this operation for months. Every movement was calculated to minimize time and maximize the value of the intelligence they were stealing. The inspector had discovered through her investigation that Morrison's financial troubles had begun 2 years earlier when his ex-wife had sued him for additional child support. The legal fees and increased payments had created serious debt problems that made him vulnerable to recruitment by foreign intelligence services. The first contact had come through what appeared to be a legitimate security consulting firm, but was actually a front for international espionage operations. Lady Catherine's motivation was different, but equally compelling. Her elderly mother required expensive medical care that the National Health Service could not provide, and private treatment costs had exhausted her savings. The opportunity to earn substantial money by providing access to royal documents had seemed like the answer to her desperate situation. She had convinced herself that the information would only be used for historical research rather than hostile intelligence gathering. Collins watched as Morrison photographed a filing cabinet containing diplomatic correspondence between the Queen and various world leaders. These personal communications often contained frank assessments of political situations that would never appear in official government documents. Such information could be extremely valuable to foreign governments seeking to understand British foreign policy and diplomatic strategies. Lady Catherine was focusing on documents related to upcoming royal visits and ceremonial occasions. The detailed security arrangements and guest lists for these events would allow hostile forces to plan everything from embarrassing protests to more serious security threats. The combination of personal intelligence and operational information made their theft incredibly dangerous for national security. The inspector activated her emergency signal, alerting backup teams throughout the building that the arrest phase of the operation was about to begin. She had to coordinate the capture of both suspects simultaneously to prevent either one from destroying evidence or alerting external contacts who might be waiting to receive the stolen materials. Marcus received the coded alert through his radio and immediately understood that the situation was escalating beyond normal security protocols. His training had prepared him for various emergency scenarios, but the prospect of arresting trusted colleagues for espionage was something he had never imagined facing. His hands trembling slightly, he moved to secure the main entrance while maintaining his outward composure. Morrison had installed small recording devices throughout the palace over the previous months, allowing him to monitor conversations between senior staff members and even some private discussions involving members of the royal family. The recordings contained sensitive information about family relationships, health concerns, and private opinions that could be used for blackmail or to damage the monarchy's public reputation. The operation had been funded and coordinated by a network that included corrupt officials in several countries, wealthy collectors of stolen historical materials, and intelligence services that wanted to gather compromising information about the British royal family. Morrison and Lady Catherine were just the visible portion of a much larger criminal enterprise that had been operating across Europe for several years. Collins knew that timing was crucial because Morrison carried a small explosive device designed to destroy evidence if the operation was discovered. Intelligence services had provided him with the device as insurance against capture, but it could also cause serious damage to the historic building and endanger the lives of everyone present for the state dinner. As the inspector prepared to enter the room and confront the suspects, she heard Morrison's radio crackle with an incoming message from the command center. One of his subordinates was reporting unusual activity in the service corridors, suggesting that backup security personnel were moving through areas where they were not normally stationed. Morrison immediately recognized that their operation had been compromised. Lady Catherine panicked when she heard the radio message, dropping several documents and beginning to gather her belongings with obvious haste. Her carefully maintained composure cracked under pressure, and she began making mistakes that would provide additional evidence of her criminal activities. Morrison, however, remained calm and began implementing emergency procedures designed to cover their escape. The deputy security chief activated a fire alarm in another section of the palace, creating confusion and drawing security personnel away from their current location. The alarm also provided cover for destroying evidence, as emergency protocols would require staff members to evacuate certain areas and leave sensitive materials temporarily unprotected. Collins realized that Morrison's experience and training made him far more dangerous than Lady Catherine, who was essentially a civilian caught up in circumstances beyond her expertise. The inspector had to neutralize Morrison's tactical advantages while preventing Lady Catherine from destroying documents or fleeing through escape routes that only palace insiders would know about. Marcus heard the fire alarm and immediately understood that it was being used as a distraction rather than responding to a real emergency. His years of experience had taught him to recognize the difference between genuine crises and manufactured diversions. He maintained his position while reporting the suspicious timing to the command center through channels that Morrison could not monitor. The state dinner guests were becoming aware that something unusual was happening, though the Queen and her protocol staff were working to maintain normal appearances. The French president asked discreet questions about the alarm, but was assured that such precautions were routine during major events and that there was no cause for concern. Morrison began photographing the most sensitive documents at an accelerated pace, knowing that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. He had identified the materials with the highest intelligence value and was focusing on items that would command the highest prices from international buyers. Lady Catherine was gathering physical items that could be smuggled out of the building more easily than photographed documents. Collins entered the room with her weapon drawn, ordering both suspects to step away from the documents and raise their hands. Morrison immediately reached for his radio to alert external contacts about the failed operation, while Lady Catherine grabbed a letter opener from the Queen's desk in a gesture of desperate defiance that surprised everyone present. The inspector commanded them to surrender peacefully, but Morrison refused to comply and began moving toward a window that led to a service balcony. His escape route had been planned in advance, with climbing equipment hidden outside and a vehicle waiting in a nearby street. Lady Catherine, however, collapsed into a chair and began crying as the reality of her situation finally became clear. Morrison activated the evidence destruction device, but Collins had anticipated this possibility and brought equipment designed to neutralize small explosives. The device produced smoke and a loud noise but failed to destroy the documents or cause significant damage to the room. Morrison's backup plan had been defeated by superior preparation and intelligence gathering. The confrontation intensified as Morrison realized that his escape routes were being blocked by backup officers positioned throughout the building. Collins had spent weeks studying the palace layout and identifying every possible exit route that the suspects might attempt to use. Morrison's knowledge of the building was comprehensive, but the inspector's preparation was more thorough. Lady Catherine began providing information about the operation in exchange for lenient treatment, revealing details about international contacts and financial arrangements that would help authorities track down other members of the criminal network. Her cooperation would prove crucial for preventing similar operations at other royal residences and government facilities. Marcus received orders to seal off his section of the building and prevent anyone from entering or leaving without authorization from Inspector Collins. The state dinner was continuing under heavy but discreet security, with the Queen maintaining perfect composure despite being informed about the crisis unfolding in her private study. The explosion that Marcus had sensed building throughout the evening was finally occurring, but it was an explosion of truth rather than violence. Years of careful planning by international criminals were being destroyed in minutes by superior police work and the dedication of loyal palace staff who had noticed suspicious activities and reported them to proper authorities. Morrison made one final attempt to escape by breaking the window and accessing the external climbing equipment, but backup officers were waiting on the balcony to apprehend him. His capture marked the end of an espionage operation that could have compromised British national security and damaged the monarchy's reputation around the world. The state dining room hummed with polite conversation as the first course was served, but Marcus could sense the underlying tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the palace. From his position near the main entrance, he had a clear view of both the dining room and the corridor that led to the administrative offices where Lady Catherine had her workspace. Inspector Collins had spent the afternoon placing discreet surveillance equipment in key locations throughout the building. Her team had discovered that the security breach extended far beyond the crown jewels, involving classified documents that contained sensitive information about upcoming state visits and diplomatic negotiations. Someone had been systematically photographing and copying materials that could compromise national security if they fell into the wrong hands. The breakthrough had come when Collins analyzed the metadata from the digital photographs found in Lady Catherine's office. The images had been taken with a camera that belonged to James Morrison, the deputy head of palace security. Morrison had served in his position for 8 years and was responsible for coordinating security arrangements for all major royal events. His access to sensitive areas was virtually unlimited, and his knowledge of security protocols made him the perfect inside accomplice for any criminal operation. Marcus knew Morrison well and had always respected his professionalism and attention to detail. The man was a former military officer who had served with distinction in Afghanistan before joining the palace staff. His record was spotless, his loyalty had never been questioned, and his expertise had prevented several security incidents over the years. The possibility that he was involved in the theft felt like a betrayal of everything Marcus held sacred about royal service. What made the situation even more complex was the relationship between Morrison and Lady Catherine. Several staff members had noticed them having private conversations in recent months, meetings that went beyond their official duties and professional responsibilities. Some had speculated about a romantic involvement, though both maintained strict professionalism in public and never gave any concrete evidence of impropriety. Collins had also discovered financial irregularities in both Morrison's and Lady Catherine's personal accounts. Large cash deposits had appeared in recent months, amounts that far exceeded their official salaries and could not be explained by any legitimate sources of income. The deposits had been made to different banks using sophisticated techniques designed to avoid detection by financial monitoring systems. As the state dinner progressed, Morrison was conducting his usual security rounds throughout the palace. His team was monitoring all entrances and exits, maintaining communication with external security services, and ensuring that the evening's events proceeded without incident. To any observer, he appeared to be performing his duties with the same dedication and competence that had earned him his position. Marcus watched Morrison enter the dining room briefly to coordinate with the serving staff, his manner calm and professional as always. The man showed no signs of stress or concern, maintaining the composed demeanor that was essential for someone in his position. If he was indeed guilty of the crimes under investigation, his ability to maintain his composure was remarkable. The Queen was engaged in animated conversation with the French president about cultural exchanges between their two countries, her knowledge and wit evident as she discussed various topics of mutual interest. She appeared completely unaware of the drama unfolding around her, though Marcus knew from experience that she was capable of maintaining perfect composure even when facing serious crises. Lady Catherine entered the dining room periodically to coordinate with the serving staff and ensure that the evening's protocol was being followed correctly. Each time Marcus observed her, she seemed more nervous than before, her movements quick and jerky rather than her usual graceful efficiency. She kept checking her phone discreetly, as if waiting for important messages that never seemed to arrive. Collins had positioned herself in the kitchen area, where she could monitor communications between the dining room staff and the administrative offices. She had intercepted several text messages between Lady Catherine and an unknown contact, messages that used coded language to discuss delivery schedules and merchandise quality. The timing of these communications coincided perfectly with the discovery of the security breach. The inspector had also learned that tonight's state dinner was serving as cover for a much larger operation. Someone had arranged for a private collector of royal memorabilia to visit London this week, supposedly for legitimate business meetings, but actually to receive stolen items and documents. The collector was staying at a luxury hotel near the palace, and surveillance teams had observed several suspicious meetings in his suite. Marcus noticed that Morrison had begun making more frequent trips to the administrative wing of the palace, ostensibly to check on security systems, but actually moving closer to the areas where the most sensitive materials were stored. His access codes would allow him to enter virtually any room in the building, and his presence would not attract attention from other staff members who were accustomed to seeing him everywhere. The conspiracy was more elaborate than anyone had initially suspected. Collins had discovered that forged documents were being created to cover the theft of original materials, making it difficult to detect what had been stolen until detailed inventories could be completed. The forgers were skilled professionals who could recreate official seals and signatures with remarkable accuracy. During the main course, Lady Catherine excused herself from the dining room to handle what she described as an urgent administrative matter. Marcus watched her walk quickly toward the elevator that led to the upper floors where the most secure offices were located. Her destination appeared to be the private study where the Queen kept her personal correspondence and confidential state papers. Collins immediately began following Lady Catherine, using the service corridors to move through the building without being seen by the dinner guests or regular security personnel. She carried a small camera to document whatever activities she might witness, and her earpiece allowed her to maintain contact with backup officers positioned throughout the building. Morrison also left his post shortly after Lady Catherine's departure, claiming that he needed to respond to a security alert in another part of the palace. Marcus realized that their simultaneous absence could not be coincidental, and he began to suspect that the evening's carefully planned operation was about to reach its climax. The French president was praising British hospitality and the magnificent restoration work that had been completed in the state dining room, unaware that criminal activity was taking place just floors above where he was dining. The other guests continued their conversations about art, politics, and international relations, maintaining the civilized atmosphere that such events were designed to promote. Marcus felt torn between his duty to remain at his assigned post and his growing conviction that something serious was happening elsewhere in the building. His radio remained silent, suggesting that Morrison had not reported any legitimate security concerns to the command center. The absence of communication was itself a warning sign that experienced guards learned to recognize. Collins reached the upper floor just as Lady Catherine was entering the Queen's private study using access codes that should have been known only to the monarch herself and her most senior advisors. The inspector watched through a partially open door as Lady Catherine began photographing documents from the Queen's personal desk, working quickly and efficiently, as if she had practiced the procedure many times before. Morrison appeared moments later carrying a small suitcase and what appeared to be sophisticated photographic equipment. He began systematically documenting the contents of filing cabinets, while Lady Catherine focused on loose papers and correspondence. Their coordination was smooth and professional, suggesting that they had been working together for some time. The inspector realized that she was witnessing the final phase of an operation that had been months in the planning. The state dinner provided perfect cover because most of the palace staff were focused on serving the distinguished guests, and security attention was concentrated on the public areas rather than the private offices. Collins activated her recording equipment and began documenting the criminal activity while simultaneously alerting her backup teams that the suspects had been caught in the act. She knew that timing would be crucial because Morrison was armed and trained in combat techniques, while Lady Catherine had detailed knowledge of escape routes throughout the building. Marcus felt his radio crackle to life as Collins coordinated with her team to prevent the suspects from leaving the building. The message was coded to avoid alerting Morrison if he was monitoring security communications, but Marcus understood that he was being asked to secure his position and prepare for an emergency situation. The state dinner continued peacefully below, but Marcus could feel his heart racing as he realized that his final day of service was about to become one of the most dramatic nights in the palace's recent history. The explosion of truth that was about to occur would forever change how everyone viewed the security and loyalty that were supposed to protect the monarchy from exactly this kind of betrayal. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic for the final time. After 22 years of faithful service to the crown, today would be his last day as a member of the Queen's Guard. His retirement ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow, but tonight's state dinner required his presence for one final duty. Marcus had seen everything during his decades of service. He had stood motionless for hours in blazing heat and freezing rain, witnessed diplomatic crises unfold behind closed doors, and maintained the stoic dignity expected of the Queen's Guard through countless challenges. His fellow guards respected him as a mentor, and even the senior palace staff sought his counsel on matters of protocol and security. The trouble began 3 weeks earlier when a routine inventory of the crown jewels revealed several discrepancies. Nothing was missing, but certain pieces had been moved from their designated positions, and the security logs showed unauthorized access during the previous month. The discovery sent shockwaves through the palace hierarchy, as access to the jewel house was restricted to only the most trusted individuals. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins from Scotland Yard had been quietly investigating the matter, working closely with palace security to avoid any public scandal. Her findings painted a disturbing picture of internal corruption that reached higher than anyone had anticipated. Someone with intimate knowledge of palace security protocols had been systematically documenting the crown jewels, photographing their storage locations, and recording guard rotations. Marcus first learned of the investigation when Inspector Collins approached him in the guardroom. She had been interviewing all personnel with access to the jewel house, and Marcus's exemplary service record made him both a valuable witness and a potential suspect. During their conversation, she revealed information that made his blood run cold. The photographs and detailed notes about the jewels had been discovered in the private office of Lady Catherine Worthington, the Queen's trusted private secretary. Lady Catherine had served the royal family for 15 years and was considered above suspicion by everyone who knew her. She coordinated the Queen's daily schedule, managed sensitive correspondence, and had unprecedented access to all areas of the palace. Marcus remembered Lady Catherine well. She had always been courteous to the guards, often stopping to chat about their families during quiet moments. She knew the names of their children and asked about their welfare with genuine concern. The idea that she could be involved in anything nefarious seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Inspector Collins explained that Lady Catherine claimed the materials had been planted in her office by someone seeking to frame her. She insisted that she was being set up by enemies within the palace who resented her influence with the Queen. The investigation had reached a delicate stage where every move had to be carefully calculated to avoid damaging the monarchy's reputation. As Marcus prepared for the evening's state dinner, he reflected on the conversations he had witnessed between Lady Catherine and various palace officials over the years. She had always been ambitious and had gradually accumulated more responsibility and influence than her official title suggested. Some of the older staff had quietly grumbled about her rapid rise and the favoritism she seemed to enjoy from the Queen. The state dinner was being held to honor the visiting president of France, and the security arrangements were more complex than usual. The dining room would be filled with diplomats, government ministers, and distinguished guests, all expecting the flawless service and security that the palace was famous for providing. Marcus and his team had rehearsed their positions multiple times, ensuring that every angle was covered and every potential threat had been considered. What Marcus didn't know was that Inspector Collins had made a breakthrough in her investigation that very afternoon. She had discovered that the security breach was far more sophisticated than initially suspected, involving multiple individuals and extending beyond the crown jewels to include sensitive state documents and diplomatic communications. The inspector had also uncovered evidence suggesting that tonight's state dinner was not chosen randomly as the time frame for Lady Catherine's alleged frame-up. Someone had been planning to use the evening's festivities as cover for a more ambitious operation, one that would require the distraction of high-profile guests and the complex security arrangements that such events demanded. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus noticed unusual activity throughout the palace. Additional security personnel had been quietly stationed in corridors he had never seen them patrol before. Several senior staff members were having hushed conversations in corners, their expressions tense and worried. Even the normally cheerful household staff seemed subdued as they prepared for the evening's events. Lady Catherine herself appeared increasingly agitated as the day progressed. Marcus observed her checking her watch repeatedly and making numerous phone calls from her office. She had changed her usual routine, arriving earlier than normal and staying later than necessary. Her typically immaculate appearance showed signs of stress, with her hair slightly disheveled and her hands trembling as she reviewed her notes. The Queen, meanwhile, seemed unaware of the drama unfolding around her. She conducted her usual afternoon audiences with visiting officials and spent time reviewing briefing papers for the evening's dinner conversations. Her calm demeanor provided a stark contrast to the tension that was building among her staff, though Marcus wondered if she was simply maintaining her composure while being fully aware of the situation. As evening approached and the palace prepared to receive its distinguished guests, Marcus felt a growing sense of unease. His years of experience had taught him to recognize when something was wrong, even when he couldn't identify the specific threat. The first guests began arriving as the sun set behind the palace walls, their limousines gliding through the gates under the watchful eyes of Marcus and his fellow guards. Diplomats and dignitaries emerged in their formal attire, unaware that they were entering a building where loyalties were being questioned and long-held truths were being challenged. Inspector Collins had positioned herself strategically among the evening's service staff, disguised as a temporary worker brought in for the special occasion. She carried a small recording device and had arranged for backup officers to be stationed at key exits throughout the building. Tonight would either clear Lady Catherine's name or provide the evidence needed to expose a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of the monarchy. Marcus took his position outside the state dining room as the final preparations were completed. The magnificent chandelier cast its warm light over the perfectly set tables, the finest china and crystal gleaming in anticipation of the evening's festivities. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but Marcus could feel the tension building like electricity in the air before a storm. The Queen made her entrance precisely on schedule, greeting the French president with the gracious dignity that had defined her reign. The assembled guests rose to their feet as the national anthems played, and the evening's formal proceedings began according to centuries of established protocol. But in the shadows of the palace corridors, Inspector Collins was moving closer to the truth that would soon explode into view, forever changing the lives of everyone present and shaking the royal household to its very core.